I'm going to kidnap your chief until I get my boats back. Now, obviously, nobody would think that that's probably not your next move. This guy probably wasn't good at chess, if I'm guessing. He just escalated the situation to 10. When you think, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week, I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This week we are talking about Hawaii, and boy, do we learn a lot. We learn that America is not so good all the time. But before we get to that, as always, we got a little bit of housekeeping to get to. 7 days a week, you can find out how things happen over at hdthappen.com. You'll always find episode transcripts, pictures and videos, maybe even a good old works cited for every episode that's done there. There's a blog out there as well. If you follow it at all, you've seen that I've opened up a little bit more about my life because I'm just trying to find a way to get through these tough times that are living. I wrote about why I just can't let go. I finally opened up about the fact that I've ended a long-term relationship about a year ago and have been kind of figuring out how to make my way through that. And so that you can head over there. I write about not even my life, just about everything really is what I'm trying to make the blog about. So don't think you're just going to go over there and find a whole bunch of emotional stuff, but definitely that is there. I've written on the Takeoff's murder, the Uvalde shooting, loneliness, suicide, all just try to cover every little crevice of society. But yeah, a little more housekeeping here. We have, let's see, what am I watching? I've been just got into this show called Snack vs. Chef on Netflix. It is actually pretty cool. I don't usually like cooking shows, like at all, really, just because I feel like they've been so overdone. I used to like them. Like as a kid, I loved them, but they just became kind of too much recently. But this one is really cool because it's all snack based. So it's not just anything. Like they actually, like the first episode, you have to make Cheetos. Like you have to make flaming hot Cheetos. So like the goal is, the first thing is try to recreate flaming hot Cheetos as best as you can. But these are people, I mean, imagine, I never even knew how you make Cheetos. Now they got me want to make my own Cheetos. And they use kind of this this polenta, this corn polenta, which is like kind of a cornmeal sort of thing. They kind of pound that out. There's a whole different thing, but they make Cheetos and then they have to make their own snack that has the same kind of Cheeto elements. So it has to have like some kind of like really kind of interesting flavor. It has to crunch, and it had to stick to your fingers because that was another big part of making the flaming hot Cheetos. You need to have the same kind of residue you have on your fingers as the normal Cheetos, and so they do that. And it's just really interesting to kind of watch these, really talented people. Because I never thought about making homemade Cheetos before, but it really caught my eye. Another thing that I'm watching right now is I've just started a full rewatch of the Fast and the Furious series. I know. I've never seen there's a couple of them that I have never seen, but I've seen most of them. And I was just listening to one of my favorite podcasts, the How Did This Get Made? And they just watched their trailer for the newest one that comes out in May, and I thought, you know what? I'm probably not going to go see it because I'm not that interested in it, but I've always wanted to understand the story better. I've always wanted to understand the story a little bit more, and so now doing it currently as we speak, I am on episode. I'm on the 6th movie. I think. Yes. And so I have a few more to go. My goal is to watch them this entire weekend. It's a 3-day weekend with the President's Day, so I'm trying to get them all knocked out. For what reason, I don't know. It's just giving me something to do, but check that out if you like those. Those are definitely good things to watch. What am I listening to? Whiskey Ginger is something that I've been kind of going back to a little bit more recently. It's a comedy podcast hosted by Andrew Santino. It's a drinking themed podcast, but it's not a drinking podcast, if that makes sense. It's the guy likes to drink, so it's a large focus of what happens, but they're not always drinking on there. It's not like We Might Be Drunk with Norman and Morel, where they drink pretty much every time. They do a little too much improv on this podcast, in my opinion, but it's still worth your time. Definitely the most recent one that I listened to was with Dan Soder. And if anybody's wondering, I mean, I list these podcasts because it is what I'm listening to. But if you wanted to submit a podcast for me to say on here that you think that people should be listening to, I'm down for that as well, because I'm always looking for a different podcast. I'm always looking for recommendations. But as always, if I can plug those podcasts, I can plug my other one, the mini-sode for this actual podcast, Bite Size Bios, BSB, is out right now. The most recent one is on Nigel Houston, and he's a skateboarder, an Olympian, and we kind of talk about what led him to be one of the most decorated skateboarders in the history of the entire sport. He's basically the current modern-day Tony Hawk. I know Tony Hawk's still alive, but I think you guys kind of know what I mean. But yeah, check that out. That's episode 20 of BSBs. Those come out every Thursday at 4:30 a.m. We have started a new small piece of content on the Twitter page called the No Context History Photo of the Week. That's been going for about a month and a half. Comes out every Wednesday. I don't have a specific time for it yet. But yeah, you kind of just, we have a new kind of idea where if you can guess the context of the history, if you can guess the context of the photo, then we'll read your Twitter handle aloud on the next Bite Size Bios. So it's worth a look if you want, even if you don't want to guess, you can go check it out on the Twitter page every Wednesday. And I find very interesting pictures of things that happen in history that you can't quite figure out when you look at, like what's going on. Who really knows? But that's what interests me. I don't know if it'll be the same for you guys, but as always, like and subscribe wherever you find this at. Give us 5 stars if you can, 2 stars, and if you want to, and then tell us why you didn't want to give us 5 stars. That's fine. Constructive criticism is always welcome. But I think there's not much more to say. Still working on getting some guests on here. I've had some conversations with some people, but just not quite sure how it fits in yet. I do want to do it. I even may try to get on some other people's podcasts and try to do a little cross-pollination. If you've checked out the website, it is updated. I finally got to it. I put a couple hours of work into it. So if that is a piece of stuff that you do go to, then it's back up kind of to where it should be. But yeah, kind of rambling now, so I'm going to go on without no further ado, as we're known to do. Here is the episode. So today we're going to talk about Hawaii and all the things that go with Hawaii. We'll talk about the kingdom. We'll talk about it being a state, what happened before that. We'll find that there are some really interesting things that happen for Hawaii to actually become a state, one of the United States of America. It's not good. It's not good. But we'll hop right in and say that the Hawaii is said to have been named after this person possibly named Hawaiialoa, who was a Polynesian navigator, one of the first Polynesians to ever come across Hawaii. We'll see when we get down human contact. The first human contact for Hawaii was about 2,000 years ago, give or take. Other possible origins for the name have said to come from Hawaii Key, which is a place which some Polynesian people have said to have originated, the actual beginning of the Polynesian people was, I guess, the Hawaii Key, so they want to call it Hawaii, depending on who you believe. But Hawaii is actually about 2,000 miles from the U.S., and it is the only state that's not on North America, because of course Alaska is at the top of North America and still connected. But Hawaii is actually, they say, one of the most remote places on the face of the earth, because it's more than like I said, about 2,000 miles from any actual mainland country. And what we're going to do is I'm going to explain a little bit more about Hawaii, and then we're going to get into the actual human history of Hawaii. I feel like it was, for whatever, because usually I would hop right into the history and then kind of get to this stuff, like the geographical or just the actual general statistics. But I'm trying something different. Why not? So yeah, Hawaii is basically made up of volcanic islands. Basically, the volcanoes, it's still an active, volcanic area. That's the volcanoes are what makes the land. The lava comes out and it cools in the water and creates the crust, the earth crust, and that's how you get more islands, basically. But that's what's continually happening on Hawaii even now. And there are 8 main islands that comprise the actual Hawaii that we know of. You got, look out, guys, I'm going to butcher these names. You got Kauai, you got Niihau, Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, Kaho'olawe, Maui, and Hawaii. So I learned something. We'll just hop right into it. That Hawaii, and that's why they always call it the Big Island. I never knew that. I've seen it. I've heard it in movies. I've heard them say it, the Big Island, because I've never been to Hawaii. But the biggest island in Hawaii is actually also called Hawaii. So that's why they call it the Big Island, and it's not, Hawaii is just much more than just that one island. So there are 8 main islands. I don't think there's much else to say about the actual geographic part of it. I kind of want to lay the scene, set the scene like that, because I would imagine most people know Hawaii, but I'm an American, so it's one of our states, so I know it. But if I didn't live in America, I probably would not have much information about Hawaii. So I don't want to just speak like everybody already knows. But we'll get into the human history of Hawaii. Like I said, the first like people to kind of get there were these Polynesian people that possibly came from the Marquesas Islands. They're not sure. They think so, and this was about, like I said, about 1,500 years ago. And then there was a second wave that came, about 2,000 years ago, and then there was a second wave that came about in the 11th century from Tahiti, or really, yeah, something like that. And this is really kind of what takes and makes the initial Hawaiian culture. You got the Polynesians from the possible Marquesas Islands, and you have the Tahitians that come along a little bit afterwards, and they kind of all come together and become what we know as Hawaiian culture. And so, like, basically what we see happen here in Hawaii is what you see happen in most societies in the world. The people kind of break off into different villages and tribes that they call, well, I mean, I'm not sure what they actually called them. The chiefs of their tribes were called Ali, it's A-L-I''I. Not for the life of me could know how to pronounce that. But so they broke down into these little villages, and they would fight each other to kind of get more land. That was kind of what you see happens all across the world. People are people. What was interesting about Hawaii is that the ancient Hawaiian society was actually caste-based, like India is now. I guess it still is, but it's kind of like based on, it's even more than like race. If you know about like caste systems, it's really like just levels of society. Like it's broken down. There are different people are put at different levels of society, which is really interesting to find out that was the way that they operated back then. Because the only caste system that I'm familiar with before this is India. But yeah, that was kind of how they dealt with their people. And they would actually end up growing. I mean, their population grew over time, from over the next 1,000 to 1,500 years. And it's said that when they had the first contact from Europeans, there was almost, I think, 1 million people, give or take. I think is what they said. And the first European contact, of course, comes from our good old friend James Cook, and we talked about him in our Australia episode. Who knew he'd be making another appearance in the Hawaii episode? And he was a piece of work, but he definitely was very instrumental he was more instrumental in the settling of Australia. He really just ended up passing through Hawaii and probably should have just not stopped there, but he couldn't help himself, and so he was the first person to first European to make contact with Hawaii. They think actually that the Spanish may have come through there in like the 1500s, but there's no real evidence, I don't believe. I mean, it's I think because the route that they took that's what leads people to believe that they had to have gone there, but they didn't try to settle it or anything. But and James Cook really wasn't either. He just was, like we talked about, on the way to Australia and coming back from. But when he got there, he called it the Sandwich Islands after the sponsor of the trip that he was on, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, John Montagu. And they actually pronounced Hawaii, or they said Hawaii, I guess the way the natives did, but they spelled it Owyhee. Oihi. I don't know how you would pronounce that, but that's actually that word, the way it's spelled, is still around in certain places in America as well. There are certain places in the Pacific Northwest that have, there's a Owyhee County, and then there's the Owyhee Mountains that are also in Idaho. And once again, this is pronounced Owyhee, which is their stylized spelling of the word Hawaii, which we'll get to the writing and speaking of the Hawaiians, because it's actually really interesting. It's interesting to me because it's kind of was my background in college, was like linguistics and communication, but to understand how their language evolves. But that is later. So like we said, Cook gets here. He gets here in like 1779. He's leaving from Great Britain. He ends up anchored off the coast of Kauai. And actually they saw him, or he first saw the Hawaiian Islands on my birthday, January the 18th, 1778. But he ends up getting over there, and he anchors off Kauai, and he's hanging out. And at first, it's actually really cool. Everyone's like loving it. The locals, they don't mind it. They're actually kind of existing in harmony for a little bit, and they're trying to get their ships fixed, I believe. But then the locals kind of get tired of them being there. I think they ended up being there for like 2 or 3 weeks, and the guys were like, all right, you was cool the first week, and it was all right the second week, but you guys are still here, And so there had been some, at that point, there had been some issues with, between the Europeans and the actual natives. But then they left. Cook left. They hopped on their ship and went out, but due to some weather and some issues, they had to actually bring the ship back to the same place they had been. So they'd only been gone for like, I don't know, a day or two, and then they show back up. And the natives were really not feeling their reappearance. And so when they come back, the natives actually end up stealing some boats, some small, like long boats, the boats you would use to go from the big ship onto shore. They took a couple of those, and Cook was like, where are my boats at? Like, this is a problem. Like, and so if I don't get my boats back, or I'm going to kidnap your chief until I get my boats back. Now, obviously, nobody would think that that's probably not your next move. This guy probably wasn't good at chess, if I'm guessing, because he just escalated the situation to 10 when you think about it. Like, he took some boats. You're going to take their leader? Like, take something of theirs. Like, take somebody that's not as important. Because, of course, understandably, they freaked out. And they stabbed this guy. They killed him, and they beat him with, like, rocks and stuff, I think, as well. And it's... Yeah, let's see. I have a more in-depth telling of this guy's murder. Yeah, so Cook went and got his gun. He was armed with... He and a few of the men were armed. They went to the village of Kauroa, where the king of Hawaii was. They attempted to take him by force, but the Hawaiians, they resisted, obviously. A Hawaiian guy got shot, and then Cook and his men, they went back to shore, but it was there that Cook got beaten, stabbed to death, and there's actually a huge statue, because they just love to put up statues to stuff like this. The huge statue where he actually got murdered, and there's a picture of it that's going to be on the Twitter, not the Twitter page, but the website tomorrow when this episode goes up. You'll see it, and it's a big, like, obelisk. Basically, it looks like a big Washington Monument, just kind of sticking up out of the water. And what's interesting about this is that it's actually owned by the British, but it's in Hawaii. So that's a little known fact. It was the Hawaiian princess, Miriam Leke. God, I knew when this episode came around, I was like, I ain't getting nobody's name right. Like, it's just not. But so she did, the Hawaiian princess Miriam. We'll go with that. Nice name. I like Miriam. She deeded the 5,682 square foot spot to England for $1, so that they could have, their little monument to their guy who got murdered. And I don't know. Like, I don't want to get into, why we should have a statue to that guy. You should have something there. I don't think it'd be a huge. Like, he overstayed his welcome, and then, like they said, it really escalated the situation. Like. You think about what you would do in that situation. You're gonna go kidnap the king? You're gonna go kidnap the king? They took a couple boats. They didn't come for your head. You know what I mean? That would be anything, or any of your people's. Any of the people that you came with. So he really probably just should have taken a different course of action. But moving on to the first American contact. So let's see, Cook gets murdered in 1779. So about 40 years later, in 1820. There are Protestant missionaries that come to Hawaii from America. And they are bringing the good word of God. And they are led by a man named Hiram Bingham, who was on the board that organized the missionaries. And they came on a boat called Thaddeus. Good old Thaddeus. I didn't play it, but the high school football coach at my high school's his first name was Thaddeus. It's a heavy name. But yeah, so they got there, and they were like in most tellings of any sort of colonizers to natives, they were just blown away with how they lived and how nobody had they didn't have that many clothes on, and people were barefoot and stuff like that, and they kind of saw them as savages, or just, if you will, and they were just overcome with the need to try to press the fear of God into them. So that's kind of what they did. And they were there. They lived there for a while. Eventually, initially they were so really truthfully afraid of the native Hawaiians as savages, that they actually stayed on the one island. They wouldn't actually branch out for at least, like I said, about a year or two. But once they did, they ended up kind of converting a lot of people. And we'll actually see when we get to the language, the Hawaiian language. It has a lot to do with them translating the Bible, because they realized they had to make a Bible that the natives could read, because they weren't teaching them English, because they wanted to use their language to help them understand, the Lord. So they had to write a Bible in Hawaiian. So they kind of had to create a written Hawaiian language. But that is a little bit later. What we'll find with these missionaries, and this is a through line that still goes all the way through to modern day right now, is that these are basically the original white people of Hawaii, to put it in the most basic terms just out there. Like when you look at the original people of any place, you had the natives, right? Or let's take South Africa, for example. We talked about South Africa with apartheid a couple episodes ago, and the initial white people that took over that area were the Dutch, right? And then the Brits came, and all that good stuff. So that's when you look at the white people that live there now, because when you go to South Africa, you see a lot of them. That's their origin, right? When you look at the white people that are in Hawaii, the origin are these Protestant missionaries from 1820, and they ended up taking over a large part of the economic makeup of that current society. Basically, they got involved in the sugarcane. They got involved politically, and we'll see that there were a couple different acts and coups that happened that allow them to continue to kind of take over control. That really was never. I mean, they came there under the guise of religion, but it's not even specifically the original missionaries. It's the descendants, the children of the children that stayed there. They're the ones who make these businesses and had these plantations and try to kind of gain favor politically, and that kind of that continues. And we'll see they are the ones who participate in the overthrow and the annexation of the country. They take it illegally. I think I've already said here once, is there's no point in kind of glossing over it. It doesn't get said that much. America has even acknowledged that we didn't do it right. Like there's like I think they said Bill Clinton apologized to Hawaii as far as he went. So it's a very interesting story. I'm gonna try to touch on as many points as I can about it. So yeah, they became wealthy, and they're, according to I believe it was a magazine or a newspaper in Hawaii at the turn of the 20th century. So right at the beginning of the 1900s, there were 91 sons and 73 daughters of missionaries, of the missionaries that came, and 101 grandsons and 73 granddaughters. This was 120 years ago when they're saying this now, and these are all the people who came initially with Christianity. And so it is very common to refer to the white people in Hawaii as the missionary party, because it's the common belief that they ruled the islands and they have leading positions in society. And so they were heavily involved in, like I said, the land and labor issues that were going on of that day. And most of them were actually U.S. citizens, because they came over as U.S. citizens already, because they came, I forget where they came from. I think they came from Boston. Let me look it up, actually. Yeah, they came from New England. It doesn't say specifically, but I thought somewhere it said Boston, but I just saw something that did say New England for sure. So yeah, they were already American citizens, and so they stayed in communication with the country, the mainland country, the entire time that they were over there. So it was kind of like a satellite, like American installation before it even ever was one. Because during this time, they still have, like I said, Hawaii was a monarchy. They had a bunch of different kings, but truthfully, and I don't think. Let's see if we're going to get into it right now. We're going to talk about the Kingdom of Hawaii in a second, but I thought there was something else I wanted to say about the first American contact in Hawaii. Let me see. No, I don't think there is. So yeah, we'll just hop to the Kingdom of Hawaii, because the Kingdom of Hawaii is what would be taken over. Not specifically, because specifically the Kingdom of Hawaii was what was taken over when it started the process of becoming a state. It would go from a kingdom to a republic to an actual state, I think, is the actual trajectory of it. Because the funny fact about it, when the Americans and the other people that they involved in this coup took over Hawaii, the current president of America, Grover Cleveland, didn't want Hawaii as a state. This was not his idea. And so what would actually happen, I'm jumping ahead of it a little bit, but we'll just keep it flowing. What would actually happen is they would have to wait until after he got out of office and then make it a state. So that's why it became a republic, because once they took it over, we'll get to the overthrow, of Hawaii in a little bit. But once they took it over, he didn't want it, so they couldn't just like make it a state when the president doesn't agree. But yeah, so we'll talk about the Kingdom of Hawaii had been around for probably at least a few hundred years. And what really made it the kingdom, because like I said before, it was like any normal civilization. There were a bunch of different little villages, and the villages maybe even become towns and however they call it. But they're very fractured. They don't work in conjunction. But what we find is that Kamehameha, the great King Kamehameha, is the one who kind of united all of the larger parts of Hawaii and brought them together. And you could even say he really did the work for America, is because he already made them they were more of a sovereign unit. Like, they were a sovereign entity that was actually respected around the world for a couple hundred years before America really sinked its teeth in there. I mean, Americans were there, but it was Hawaii had been its own country and respected for and understood to be its own independent nation for a long time. That's something that I did not know at all. I just assumed that it was just an island that was out there. But because Kamehameha had done so much and other kings before him, they brought together an actual nation that was respected. I think even to go back on my point before, they were known as I'm not sure. Let me look. Yeah, I was trying to see if there was a different name that they went under during that time, but I think it was just the Kingdom of Hawaii or the Hawaiian Kingdom. But yeah, it was the House of Kamehameha who really kind of shaped Hawaii to be the predecessor for what it is now, or to be the predecessor for what would be taken over about 125 years ago. Okay, so now we'll kind of get into the first couple dominoes that start to fall for the Kingdom of Hawaii and kind of turn it into Hawaii. So we'll see in 1887, King Kalakaua, one of them, he was forced to sign a new constitution by this military militia called the Honolulu Rifles, which was just a bunch of guys who were kind of cavalry. And they were anti-monarchist, so they were trying to push this whole democracy thing on the country. So they basically kind of made this guy do it. And so what the Constitution did is it actually stripped the monarchy of most of the power and gave voting rights to land-owning white citizens that were living there. Because before they couldn't vote, they didn't have a political voice. So this basically gave the white land-owning citizens, most of which who were descendants of the first, the Protestant Missionaries from 1820. It gave them the right to vote and now have a voice in what happens on a kind of national level. In addition, like we said, it kind of stripped all the power, or most of the power, from the monarchy and kind of made it more what the British monarchy is now. Whereas we know before, back in the day, they were like really ruling as kings and queens. Now they don't really do that. That's kind of what happened here. And if you really want to say, that's really, like I said, it's where the first dominoes do start to fall. Is like you've given up power. And it's basically it's the biggest transfer of power I think that we'll see, short of the actual overthrow when they just say y'all don't have it anymore. But this is a big shift here. This was, of course, like I said, in 1887. In 1893 is actually when the coup would start. Basically, the Honolulu Rifles and the Committee of Safety, which is some interesting names to kind of put together. Like, remember, the Rifles are the guys who initially made the king sign the new constitution. The Committee of Safety are people who they've come together. It's non-native people, like mostly the descendants of the missionaries, and then a couple native people who believe in that Hawaii should be a state, and they call themselves the Committee of Safety. They're the ones who kind of go and are basically in control of this takeover of Hawaii. And what we'll see that happen is they read aloud this thing, say that the queen is no longer the queen, and we've taken over this, and we're going to create a provisional government, yada yada yada. And they're not sure how everyone's going to feel about that. So America actually sends Marines over to kind of just hang out and watch this all happen. They never actually do anything, but because they're there, they kind of do force the hand of the queen to make her kind of just give up the kingdom. And I have her words here, and I'll read them. This is basically what she said after sitting in, because she was kind of under house arrest after all this happened. She had kind of been taken, from her kingdom, and was kind of just, I think they said that in the Lolani house, I believe, the Iolani house, one of the two. But so she was sitting there thinking, like, what do I do? Do I let them take it? Do I fight them? What's the best course of action? So she ends up deciding that she's gonna kind of give in. But these are her words. She says, "I, Lili Kalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Queen, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional government of and for this kingdom." She's talking about America, and she's saying she's completely against all of it. That I yield, back to the quote, that I yield to the superior force of the United States of America, whose minister plenipotentiary, His Excellency John L. Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the provisional government. The troops, like we said, the Marines kind of came over and we're just kind of pulled up on shore, like, hey, in case we need to do something. Back to the quote, "Not to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do this under protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representatives and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Islands." So she's basically saying, I'm going to give this up to you right now, but you're wrong. So whenever you figure out that you're wrong and you come back and tell me I'm queen, I'm waiting. Those are her words. I thought it was interesting to put there because, this is really Hawaii's last breath as an independent nation. These last moments when she's reading this, when her words come out, and she's giving up. I don't mean give up in a bad way. I'm just saying, like, she's surrendering to America in 1893 to say, you guys can have it. And like we said, so what actually happens is it doesn't just become a state, because that wasn't the plan politically, at least from the current political system that was in place in America at the time. There were a lot of people who wanted it to happen, but the current leaders really actually didn't want it to happen. So they had to make a provisional government, and they would actually go on to be annexed and become a territory. And so in 1898 was actually when they signed they passed the Newlands Resolution, which is what actually annexed the old Kingdom of Hawaii and made them a territory of America. And then it was the Organic Act, I believe, in 1900 that permitted Hawaii to have a non-voting delegate in the U.S. House of Representatives. So that's when they first kind of get representation in Congress, is in like 2 years after their annex. And so you would see Hawaii would then go on to continue to be a territory for the next 60 years, and they would become a state by voter referendum. With them, I think it was 93% of the people there voted to become a state. And a referendum is just, of course, something where you kind of just vote to kind of figure something out. Like, we're all going to vote, and whatever happens is what happens as a referendum. And so that's what they did. So that was in 1959. And so that is pretty much Hawaii. I wanted to kind of say I had some stuff to mention about the language, but I kind of feel like I already kind of told that earlier. There's not much to mention. I thought it was interesting that the missionaries from New England used the Bible as a way to kind of translate and kind of create the Hawaiian language. The Hawaiian language was not a written language, I don't believe, until the missionaries came to Hawaii. And that's why I thought it was interesting, because you have a language that is, an amalgamation, if you will. It's got so many different probably parts from over these 1,000 or so years, that the different cultures have come together and make the Hawaiian culture that they hadn't even evolved to actually being written down yet. And there's interesting things about Hawaiian, like some other languages, is they have their own pidgin language, which pidgin is kind of a language within itself. It's spelled Pidgin, and it's like something that kind of happens when you have these languages that kind of come together, but it's not. It's almost like, it's basically like Spanglish, or something like that. And it's a version of that where you have these two languages that happen, but really it's one. It's not either language, but it's basically both. And Hawaiian has that with English. There is kind of a mixed kind of Hawaiian and English, and that is how Hawaii happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're gonna round it up. First human contact for Hawaii came about 2,000 years ago, most likely from the Marquesas Islands. Hawaii was both a kingdom and an independent nation before being annexed by America. It was taken illegally by the United States in the late 19th century. Things I didn't know before, and now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right. So for the things I didn't know before, I do have a couple things. Hawaii is a interesting kind of there's so much going on there, really. So the first thing we'll just hop right into it is you can mail a coconut from there. That's really cool. I mean, I've been to like the Bahamas and stuff. I wonder if they do that stuff there too. But yeah, you can just pick up old coconut, dried coconut, and you can write an address on it and put it in the mail, and they will mail it. That's pretty interesting. They have like designs and stuff. You can buy them at stores and hotels and stuff like that. I think it's pretty cool. Hawaii is the only U.S. state with 2 official languages. That I thought was really cool. We talked about the languages a little bit earlier in the last segment, but Hawaiian is an official language in Hawaii, and English is as well. So it's the only state that has 2 actual official languages. They don't have squirrels and hamsters and stuff like that, and it's illegal to bring them. So if you live in Hawaii, you can't have a hamster, and you just won't see squirrels, which is not that crazy when you think about it. I feel like squirrels are much more common in a temperate sort of deciduous kind of forest thing instead of a tropical environment. Are there tropical squirrels? I guess there are, but not in Hawaii. It sounds like. And like we said a little bit earlier, Hawaii is the most isolated population in the world. It's 2,400 miles from the closest landmass, which is America. So kind of is a little bit fitting that it's one of our states, but not the way we talked about how they came about it. But yeah, so it's so far out that it literally has its own time zone. So they operate on their own time zone. I thought that was really cool because you've heard the different things about you go there and relax, and you're on aloha time and stuff like that. So they really do, like, literally there is an aloha time. Like, they have Hawaiian Standard Time, and they do not observe daylight savings time. Another interesting thing. All right, that was another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. Learned a lot about Hawaii, and I'll tell you, I didn't know the story before this. Like, I knew that there was some stuff that happened. I knew that there used to be a king and all that stuff, but to really see how people there, and the Americans, how they all kind of just work to just take the country out from under the natives. It's kind of, it's pretty messed up. Makes me want to know how Alaska happened. I don't know, maybe we'll just hop into that and find out some more crazy stuff. Maybe it's not such a crazy story. I don't know. But this was definitely eye-opening for me. Good pod. I think so. As always, go over to hdthappen.com for more. Got the Works Cited over there, the blogs and everything, and the Twitter account. Anything HDT Happen, you can find us. Instagram, Twitter, any of that good stuff. Give us 5 stars anywhere you listen to this. 2 stars if you don't want to, or 2 stars if you don't want to give us 5 stars. But tell us why you didn't want to give us 5 stars, and that'd be awesome too. But yeah, I think that's about it for this week. See you guys in a couple days with the next BSB.